suitable for sequestration. So depending on where you are, and depending on where you have to carry your CO2 to the sequestration place, the transportation length might be long. And then even after sequestration, even after you put your CO2 into deep underground, there still is a concern about a long-term storage. What will happen when we try to store CO2 deep underground for over a long period of time? And then on top of that, some are still concerned about the environmental effect, what might be caused because of the CO2 we have sequestered underground. And I think these are the reasons, there's somebody in the previous panel talked about the regulation issues in some countries. I think this comes from these issues. And lastly, what we want to think about also is, it says economic incentives, but we have to think about how this system could work economically or profitably, financially. So speaking about economic aspect of CCS, the NEDO, we are working very hard to reduce the cost of CCS. There are some technologies that might contribute, but still, CCS will add significant amount of cost to the operation cost of the coal-fired generation power plants. Our estimate, there might be different kinds of estimate, but our estimate says that only capturing as $30 per megawatt hour on top of the coal-fired generation power plants operation. Plus, there will be transport and sequestration, which is unknown. That will be different depending on what environment you are doing CCS. So, well, I'm not saying that CCS will not work, but we have to think and work to come up with a good way to make CCS economically viable or workable. When speaking about this, well, there is one way that could make CCS work economically, which is EOR. This has been already touched upon today. The EOR is, like putting your CO2 into the old oil fields or maybe dead or dying oil fields so that you get more oil than originally expected from the oil fields, right? So by producing more oil, that makes economical sense. However, so in that sense, it's a very good technology that makes it economically viable. But the issue is it only works where it works. The left picture is the locations of the oil fields that are suitable for EOR, CO2 EOR. And then the right picture is the distribution of stationary CO2 sources with blue dots representing the electricity CO2 emission sources. So as you see this, they do not really match with each other. So where it works, EOR works very well. But there are so many places that where EOR does not work. So that's why we have to continue to work to come up with other ways to utilize, CO2 from carbon capture, or maybe some other ways to make sure CCS makes economical sense. By the way, the U.S., well, this was touched upon as well, but the U.S. is one of the few countries where EOR works well. So even in the US, the situation is like this. Okay. So that's about my first item. And then moving on to the second point, before getting into detail about the higher efficiency of coal-fired power plants, let me do this. This is pretty much a coal-fired power generation technology 101. Well, by the way, this is too simple, very simple and too simple, and then maybe inaccurate. When I talked to one of my experts, he said he didn't like this. But that is okay. That's okay. As you go down, I mean, the top is the subcritical. If you go down from the top, the subcritical, supercritical, ultra supercritical, the only difference is, well, if I say only, he would be mad, but the difference is that you get the higher pressure of steam from boiler so that your steam turbine gives you more electricity. That's why the lower the efficient. So the ultra supercritical is the most efficient technology that is commercially available at this point in time. Then speaking about the upcoming technologies, the two in the bottom, the second from the bottom, the IGCC, is you somehow turn coal into gas, which goes into gas turbine, which is a generator, the first generator, before the steam going into steam turbine, which is your second generator. The last one on the bottom, the IGFC, is the gas. I mean, after you turn coal into gas, that gas goes through fuel cell before getting into gas turbine. So you get 3 generations here. That's why this is the most efficient and promising technology. Having in mind this inaccurate understanding, the technology roadmap is here. This is our technology roadmap that we are working hard to go with this plan. And you see the arrow here. We are around 40-something%, depending on the situation. Commercially speaking, the best efficiency that is achieved today is 43%. But our plan is to achieve up to 65% by 2050. Okay, and we are working very hard to achieve this goal by 2050. However, the point is that while we are working very hard on technologies for the future, people, the many plants are being built. Many plants are standing up today, right? And that is why we have to make sure, that is why I have to talk about using what is available today, the third point. So now moving on to the third point, the use what is available today. So first of all, how does the best plant today look like? This is the picture from the best coal plant in Japan and also in the world. This is another picture from the same plant was shown by Ito-san in the previous panel, but the reason I prefer this picture is it's not about the plant. I mean, the plant is beautiful. The plant was beautiful in the Ito-san's picture, but the difference is you see the residential houses on the bottom. This means, you see, I don't know the exact distance, but you see the residential houses so close to coal power plants. Okay, so this means, that not only beautiful, that power plant is clean and also silent. Okay, not sure how much being beautiful matters here, but if the picture is not enough, I will illustrate how efficient the current best technology is by number. Okay. The notional calculation tells you that if we use USC, ultra super critical technologies, for all the replacements and all the newly built plants in non-OECD Asia, the reduction will be 1,100 million tons per year compared to another scenario, which is subcritical technology. And now, how big is 1,100 million tons per year? To give you an idea, by the way, Japan's total CO2 emission. Okay, by total I mean not the not all the coal-fired power plants, including automobiles, the manufacturing plants, household, offices, everything. Japan's total CO2 emission is 1,200 million tons per year. So by choosing ultra super critical as opposed to subcritical, this is like Japan. I don't want Japan to disappear, but this is like Japan totally stopping its CO2 emission. Okay, so this is how efficient the current best technology is. And in addition to CO2, well, before CO2 started to be called a pollution, traditionally, when we speak about pollution, it was about SOx and NOx. Okay, then looking at that aspect, this is about the same plant. The picture, the plant from the picture, the Isogo power plant. I had to circle the Isogo power plant. It was invisible. The number is so small compared to other bars. And then another point is, well, here I am comparing this to the numbers from the US, Canada, UK, France, and all those countries. But numbers from those countries are not from coal power plants. Okay? The numbers here are the average of fossil fuel power plants, which means this includes gas. Even after including gas, the Isogo power plant, which is the USC technology, is clean this much. Okay. So that's about USC. However, what is happening is the people are not choosing this technology. Okay. The IEA says around half of the world are subcritical, using subcritical. Then around 1/3 of China is subcritical. And then in India, almost all the new plants are using subcritical. The reason is easy. If you look at the table on the bottom, the reason is the subcritical is the cheapest. Okay, the cheapest is a good thing, but the downside is that it's least efficient, 34% efficiency. What least efficient means they need more fuel. Okay, then how much more fuel? That's 20% more fuel compared to USC. So, so by choosing the cheapest, they are losing money. But you might not care if they lose money, but what is important is they are producing more CO2 than necessary by choosing this. So that is why we have to help them make a right decision, for the sake of them and us. For this purpose, providing financial assistance can be an option, but from, being from NEDO, I want to talk about something else today. That is feasibility study assistance that we are providing to different countries. Well, so far there has been 19 projects in 11 countries. Now, analyzing how the new technology would work in the country, we are helping those countries make a right decision in terms of what technologies to use, right? And then I think everyone is looking at the triangle in the US, but this is the feasibility study project in California, but I'll talk about this later. Another aspect of coal power plant technology is maintenance. After building a new plant, you have to use this for over like 40 years, right? So the keeping up the plant's performance over time is important. This example, Takasago plant, by the Isogo power plant that I love, is too new to do this. The Isogo power plant has been operating around 40% originally designed efficiency over 40 years compared to another plant that has dropped off quickly. I can't say what country this is from. But this is the difference. So that's why the maintenance technology is, important as well. The last, this is going to be the last slide. Then, the U.S.-Japan cooperation is going on. Then some examples are here. The number one, the HICA project is located in California, and then this began with our feasibility study project. And then because of which, Japanese companies are participating in construction, and then they are still in construction and hoping to see its completion. And the second one is discussion is going on retrofitting modification project on the US existing plant for the sake of pollution reduction. And then also we are happy to reach out for potential partners, and the picture is from the recent tour we had with the West Virginia University and National Energy Technology Laboratory of DOE. And hopefully there will be more opportunities to cooperate. And if you have something, please let me know. With that, I will conclude my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have later. Thank you very much.
Actually, if I may, I'd like to ask just quick qualifying questions so that let's save the definitely sort of substantive questions later. But just your slide on, excuse me, slide number 13. Just wanted to make sure I understood this correctly. 13, the one before. Yep, 13. Yeah, that one. So the U.S., Canada, UK, those the European ones. So did you say that's the average from the coal, oil, and gas power plants? So it's the sum? The average, okay, average from coal, oil, and gas. Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Right,
okay.
right.
Yep.
Compared to the average,
Yep.
Isogo coal-fired power plant. And coal plant is much cleaner than the average of
okay.
coal and gas. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sorry, and then just the other, this one, the blue line, just to make sure, is when you say a certain coal-fired plant for comparison, you mean a non-Japanese? Is that what you meant by that? It's in a certain country?
Japan.
Okay, okay.
I don't think it's good to say what country.
Right, no. Just wanted to make sure. A certain sounded very sort of mysterious, so okay, sounds good. Great.
Thank you very much.
Next, Bob, please. Yes, please.
Well, again, thank you, Jane, and for the introductions earlier, and it's a pleasure to be here with everyone. Thanks, Hiro, for that presentation. I'll try not to duplicate all the information you had on the efficiencies of the different technologies, and try to lay out a little bit of history as well as where I think we need to go. If you think of all the Now, if I'm going to say the word power plant, I'm going to mean a site where there's a power plant. Sometimes there's more than one generator or boiler at that site, but let me just use the word plant for sake of use here. So in the United States, a couple of years ago, there was 557 coal-fired power plant sites. In China, there's 620. And in the world, there's 2,300. So China and the U.S. have 51% of the power plants. Now, I'm not counting units again, but just probably close. So U.S. and China have 51% of the coal-fired power plant sites in the world. And we know that from some of the reports that we received from IEA and others, that we currently, in the last couple of years, and you had similar data, Hiro, that we got about 1,600 gigawatts of coal-fired electricity capacity, and it's expected, and I think this matches your chart pretty well, to grow by 2035, 2040 to about 2,600. You had 2,630. So so this is current growth. So that's a 60% growth between today and let's say 2040 or mid-2030s. And a lot of that growth is going to be in Asia and in India and in other parts of the developing world, less so in the U.S., but there will be some growth in the U.S. as heat rate is improved on plants and some additional technologies are built in. And the global coal demand is expected to rise just over the next 5 years from 7.8 billion tons in 2013 to a little over 9 billion tons in 2019. So there's going to be continued growth in the demand for the fuel as well. And I put these numbers out there because I think you might have heard some of these already today. They're very similar, to some of the numbers you had. I mean, what it shows is that the world is making a huge commitment in this fixed infrastructure. We're talking about 42, something like that, % of the world's electricity being generated from this type of fuel. And I'm not counting in natural gas, which is another big hunk. But when you look at these fossil fuels, we're probably in that 50% zone of the world's electricity being generated from it for at least another several decades, which is getting us into the middle part of this century where we're supposed to be making some substantial reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. But at the same time, we're trying to, as a world, you may wonder sometime whether we're able to think about this stuff or not from all the world events you hear, but as a world, we're trying to raise everybody's standard of living and quality of life. And in order to do that, there's over 1 billion people on Earth that do not have electricity. And so you have to think through that we have that other conflicting characteristic of our modern thinking in the world is that we want people to have a better quality of life. I think most of us would agree that, although sometimes I think a tent in the woods would be good, a quality of life in modern society includes having some electricity. And so these conflicting, or at least let's say challenging, mutually challenging goals that we have as a planet to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, but at the same time try to grow the quality of life of all of our citizens on the planet is a very difficult contextual thing that we have to think about. So if the reality is, and this is where, I think maybe why you asked me to be here, if the reality is we're going to have this kind of power generation on Earth for quite a while in this century, we need to figure out how we're going to deal with the emissions. And so I actually often say it's not the fuel, it's the emissions that we have to deal with. And the history piece that I want to lay in here, Jane, is that in the U.S., just as pulling back into the U.S., and you saw the performance of the U.S. plants aggregately compared to some of the high-performing plants in Japan. Well, we have some of those high-performing plants in the U.S. also. Those are averages. We have plants that are getting very, very low. I want to say, very close to zero almost, in sulfur dioxide emissions and nitrogen oxide emissions. That's a phenomenal achievement. When I first started in air pollution control 30 years ago, we had things like low NOx burners where we hoped to, get a 20 or 30 or maybe, if we were really lucky, a 40% reduction. And I remember having conversations with engineers and they saying, "What's wrong with you, Bob? The air is 80% nitrogen. I can't burn something and not have it be exposed to that nitrogen, creating oxidized nitrogen." Well, today we have selective catalytic reduction. We've developed catalysts. We've perfected the way to deal with this and change it into a different kind of gas and a different kind of product. So we've made some fantastic, and I have to say fantastic, reductions in pollution from coal-fired power plants. And this is the thing I always like to look at, our current average cost per kilowatt hour in the United States is 10.5 cents. In 1985, our average cost per kilowatt hour was 6.5 cents. In today's dollars, that would be 14 cents. The 6.5 cents would be 14 cents today. Our average today is 10.5 cents. So, you know, you could say we're starving our infrastructure here by not charging the same amount of money in buying power than we did in 1985. But what we've done over the last 20 years is invested in pollution control that has had a fantastic reduction in pollution and an amazing impact on public health. And so when I talk to my colleagues in the industry, in the power industry and even in the mining industry, and I say, well, this is an amazing technological and innovative achievement we've had over the last 30 years. What makes you think we can't do that with carbon dioxide over the next 30 years? And of course, what we were just seeing is some of the emerging technologies that are out there to make the plants more efficient to begin with, which who's opposed to that? And second, you know, trying to capture it. And so when you look at what we've been able to do, and I'm just using the U.S. example in that case, and how it's affected the actual consumers, both commercial and residential and industrial, we've been able to hold the cost pretty constant when compared to, in fact, lower when compared to inflation. Now, there's anomalies, there's regional differences. It's higher in New England than it is in Alabama, but the average, I'm looking at the average. So how do we take that next step, and what are these emerging technologies? I'm not going to go through them in detail, as I think Hiro did a very good job of laying out some of them, but let's talk about what's actually happening on the ground. We now have, on North America, a carbon capture and storage plant operating at Sask Power at their Boundary Dam location. It's been operational, I believe, since October of this year, and it's coupled up with enhanced oil recovery. And one will say, you know, some of my colleagues on the environmental side will say, well, we don't want to have this enhanced oil recovery. You're pushing more hydrocarbons out of the ground and burning them in cars or trucks or airplanes. And so, yes, indeed, there is a penalty there, you know, in terms of hydrocarbons, but there's still about a 35% benefit of doing it. But the key is what Hiro has said, and I want to reiterate it. We don't have an economic model right now to help us finance carbon capture and storage. And the economic transition, I'll call it, model of being paid for that carbon to do the enhanced oil recovery is a very good transition concept, because what it'll do is it'll enable us to build more carbon and capture and storage plants. And the more we build, the cheaper they will become. And that's what's happened with the air pollution I just mentioned earlier, with all those, you know, we went from big wacko wet scrubbers down to, you know, injection, and, you know, so we've reduced the cost there. And so, and I'm going to quote from Bob Watson, from Sask Power's CEO, in an article a couple of weeks ago. He said, "We fully expect to build another unit at the same location, but we expect it to be 20 to 30% cheaper to build, because what they learned just building the first one." And so I think that this is a pretty important component of it, finding that bridge period and how we do it. And I agree with what Hiro said in terms of the use of EOR as that potential economic model in the near term. And of course, you know what the economic model is in the long term. There has to be a price on carbon so that you'll get paid to sticking it in the ground. I'm just saying. And you have to do it in places that are not, I'm pointing out, not at the camera, but at the map that was on the wall there before. You'll have to do it in the places that were white on that camera that don't have, on that map, that don't have enhanced oil recovery opportunities. Otherwise, we'll be building pipelines all over the place. So now, the other good thing, besides the fact that we now have one operating, we have one under construction in Mississippi, and I think actually that the map showed some of the pipelines and opportunities in Mississippi and the U.S. by the Southern Power Company at Kemper, and that isn't operational yet, but it is under construction. And in China, while there are 12 commercial scale projects being discussed, and none of them are yet under construction, but GreenGen will likely be the first project, and that's an agreement between Waneng and Peabody, but it'll be a while, maybe toward the end of this decade before that is actually running. But that's also going to be EOR. And then there's also between Waneng and Summit Power, who are actually part of a dialogue that I've been involved with called the National Enhanced Oil Recovery Initiative, where we're having these multi-stakeholder conversations in the U.S. about using enhanced oil recovery not only to improve the efficacy of oil wells that have not producing anymore, but also to build more carbon capture and storage technology to learn how to do a better job of it. And so this MOU is in terms of sharing data as we were trying to do these projects so that we can share it. Now, I told you how many power plants we're going to have in the world that are based on coal, and then how many we're going to have in the world that are based on natural gas. At the end of this century, all of them, we're going to have to be trying to if we want to get an 80% reduction by the end of the century or sooner in greenhouse gas emissions, we're going to have to be doing something with that carbon, whether it's capturing it and sequestering it, or whether it's capturing and using it in some kind of other economic activity. We're going to need to do that. So I'm going to stop there in that kind of high-level discussion, but you see the challenge of the amount of investment we're making in that kind of power and the balancing goals of improving the quality of life on Earth and at the same time trying to deal with greenhouse gases, and the fact that we've had success in the past of reducing the unit cost of substantial treatment on power plants, and we are at the beginning of that process now. I see somebody helpfully put the map up there, and you can see Mississippi over there. I can't do it, but anyway. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Bob. Next, Ben, please.
Oh, it didn't work. Thank you so much, and let me start by apologizing to you because a number of my slides, I noticed when I was sitting here earlier today, I used a font that was so small that it's going to be difficult for you to see, but I want you to take heart because I have about 50 slides, and I'm going to move through them so quickly you won't be able to read the slide anyway. Now, in truth, the slides will be available. Jane tells me that that's the case, and so if we don't see some things, they will be available. Let me, first of all, thank Jane and also the Center for having me here. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the discussion, and I want you to know, Bob, that because I'm a big coal guy, on the technology side, we are absolutely parallel. And I thank you for that, and you have a long reputation of being fair and realistic, and it's a pleasure for me to be here with you. Let me also say that, well, Jane noted that I'm the executive director of the so-called Coal Utilization Research Council, or CURC as we like to call it, and I'll actually be making some reference to some of our studies and conclusions and whatnot. The views that I'm about to express with you are entirely my own. That's like an antitrust statement, I think. But in any case, I did want you to know that. Let me begin by making 2 points. And first of all, as I think both of my fellow panelists pointed out, CO2 cannot be effectively addressed without carbon capture and sequestration. Just a point. Second point that I want to talk a bit about is our country needs energy options. We need all energy options. This is one of those slides I was talking about, but if you can't see it, in 2019 in China and India, coal plants planned or under construction will emit annually as much or more CO2 than the entire U.S. coal fleet currently emits annually. emphasize, this is only the CO2 emissions from plants to be built in those two countries over the next half dozen years. I think I'm just augmenting a point that our panelists have already made. But both the EIA and the IEA are also expecting Africa to increase coal use by 50 to 70% between now and about 2040 at the African Summit that was held in Washington, D.C. several months ago. I thought that African leaders made it abundantly clear that they will use coal for the 600 million people on that continent that have little or no electricity. India, at the UN Climate Conference in New York City several in late summer, made similar points. This past summer, the leaders of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South America launched the New Development Bank with $50 billion in subscribed capital and authorized capital of approximately $100 billion as an operating bid to finance infrastructure and sustainable development projects, coal being one of those kinds of projects. So let's be clear. If you eliminate coal use in the United States, eliminate all the coal-using power plants in the United States, we will achieve a 3% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions globally. The EIA, the IEA representative who was on the previous panel, noted this new medium-term outlook that the IEA has just released this past week, and indicating that the world's coal consumption will continue to climb for the next 5 years, despite the agreement between China and the United States, the two leaders of those two countries. And I think it's important to note, and I quote from the executive director of the IEA, Maria van der Hoeven, who said, quote, "Coal use in its current form is simply unsustainable. We need to radically accelerate deployment of carbon capture and sequestration." And I think that's the point that I would want to make to you as it relates to CO2 in the world arena. Let me also talk a bit about the importance of energy options. I'm not going to spend any time on this. All of you, I am certain, have gone through this litany of the benefits and the costs of all of these energy options that exist. And what I want to emphasize is each one of them has their benefits and their drawbacks. Let me simply say that the Japanese know all too well the price being paid for great reliance on one fuel source. This next slide is simply to depict that and the degree of reliance that exists both in Japan and the consequences of Fukushima, but also what has happened in Germany with respect to renewables. We haven't talked very much about that day, and I don't intend to use it as a whipping boy, but let me just say that in 2013, installed capacity of wind and solar in Germany nearly equaled the installed capacity of fossil fuels. That's good, but wind and solar energy producers got a guaranteed price, usually well above market price, and this electricity is dispatched to the grid before other conventional resources. As a result, in Germany, electricity prices have more than doubled and are 40 cents per kilowatt hour compared to the U.S. average, as Bob pointed out, of about 10 cents per kilowatt hour. And what does that really mean? That means we have a competitive advantage because of the price of electricity and, frankly, the price of the existing fleet that delivers that electricity. The important metric I want to point out with respect to the costs of electricity to the American consumer, at least some economists say that a 10% increase in electricity costs leads to a 1% decrease in gross domestic product and a loss of as many as 1.5 million jobs. Now, whether you believe or not, that of course is part and central of the debate that's taking place even right now as we look at the proposed EPA regulations called 111B and 111D. So options matter. CCS is critical to effectively addressing global CO2 emissions. And my point here with this chart from the Department of Energy is, do we have a demand pool that will allow this country to be a leader in both the development and then the use of CO2 in newly constructed units? And for that matter, the same question applies to the existing system and the existing fleet. How are we going to address new projected demand? All of us in the previous panel have come to the same conclusion. It's not hard. It's certainly not rocket science. It is really more rock science. And that is, we're going to, at least primarily, use natural gas. EIA in its AEO 2014 early release report projected that in order to use all that natural gas, which is that orange line, I don't know what it looks like up here, but if you look at the monitors over here, you can better see it. The orange hash marks are natural gas. You don't see any coal up there, of course, between now and 2040. But to use that natural gas, it will be about 130 gigawatts of new natural gas combined cycle. It'll be about 84 gigawatts of combustion turbines gas-fired, and that equates to about 2.1 TCF of incremental natural gas use for electricity from a 2012 baseload. Let me just say that a primary reason, again, as other speakers have said, for this increased gas capacity is both price and availability. You just can't avoid that. It's worth keeping in mind that in 2004, natural gas used for power production, however, nearly doubled in price in 2 years to reach $5.50 per MCF. Then it doubled again in 2008, if you'll recall, to reach $12.41. And then in 2012, it dropped to $2.81. And right now, it's around $5 or $6. I think the point is pretty obvious. Well, adding to the fact that we don't have any new projected demand for coal, what we're trying to show here is that the existing fleet is getting old. In 2020, the average time of existence of the existing fleet will be about 42 years old. It's important to understand that this existing fleet, according to the EIA, is still expected to provide about 38% of all of the electricity requirements through 2040 in the U.S. Now, here's my point, I guess. We have an existing fleet that provides low-cost electricity. It's reliable. And after full implementation of MATS, or the Mercury Rule, generally, I would say this fleet will be compliant with most of our existing environmental requirements for criteria pollutants, save CO2. But the point here is it's a clean fleet. It's going to be a clean fleet. Those who have performed economic impacts to the economy and to families with higher electricity prices, and these increases are going to happen, particularly with the retirements that are projected, both as a consequence of MATS, which is, wherever you can say, it's between 50 and 60 gigawatts, and at least under one scenario that EPA has provided under the 111D rule, if it's promulgated as it's been proposed, there might be as much as 49 additional gigawatts. If you add that up, that's about 100 to 110 gigawatts of capacity in the U.S. out of 310 gigawatt fleet currently. So I think the importance here, again, getting back to the issue of the existing units, in 2040, that fleet, keep in mind, we're not going to build any new ones. That fleet is going to be about 62 years old. So I want to come back to the importance of the existing fleet and talk about this really in the context of how complicated all of this is. And I really do think that Bob did an excellent job of indicating that it is very complex and that we need to find some kind of symbiotic relationship between these seemingly divergent requirements in our society for more and more abundant and lower cost electricity, but also with attention to the need for environmental stewardship. We don't need to talk about these, but I want to remind you about some of the exigencies that have happened over the last 12 months that remind us not just about the value of the existing fleet, but frankly, the need to keep in mind that as we retire elements of that fleet, and others have talked, I think, a lot about the potential reliability of the grid as we continue to retire much of this fleet. We've talked a bit about, particularly in Germany, about renewable energy and what I guess I would have to call the market distortions that are a consequence of too much, in my mind, subsidy in some places in the world. Limiting options is just a matter of what it is, whether it's nuclear or natural gas price volatility. And as I said earlier, it's our duty, in my view at least, that we be good environmental stewards. And I, at least personally, consider CO2 a major challenge. But generally, if you look at the American consumer, the only thing he or she expects is power when they put something in to the ubiquitous outlet. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have as we think about the complexity of the system that we're trying to deal with and the regulatory regime that we're trying to create. What I now want to talk about is what I think is the timely issue here. It's time. It's been time for a long time to really focus upon technology, or as the IEA executive director said, radically accelerate deployment of CCS technology. And let me just say again at the outset that you've seen some of the estimates. Hatada-san made comment about the costs and cost comparisons. Others did as well, including Dr. Friedman. The Kirk, and this is where I will wander back into the Kirk and my role in Kirk, and that is that the simple conclusion here, current status of carbon capture technology, it costs too much. We at least would argue that we haven't integrated all of this. We're getting there with Kemper and with Boundary Dam. We haven't integrated all of this technology. We know about it, but we haven't integrated it into functioning commercial-sized power systems. We'll get there, but we're not there yet. But the biggest impediment, and I think all of us again agree on this, is that the driver, the market driver here isn't there with low-cost, very abundant, very affordable natural gas, and it's not there because our economy isn't bubbling at 90% also. So when you put all those factors together, it's not hard to conclude that the drivers here for technology development don't really exist for a variety of reasons, particularly with respect to something that at least the users of that technology, at least in this country, view it as pretty risky stuff. And I won't try to go into the costs and the values of all of that, but I would like to spend just a minute echoing what Bob said before. We have been very successful in using technology as the fulcrum to ensure that we have a more environmentally pure world or environmentally sustainable world. You just have to look at these are EPA charts, by the way. The metrics are the same, everything. It takes a picture of 1990 SO2 concentrations, the white vein down through the U.S. in that one slide is because there were no monitoring stations there. But a picture in 1990 and a picture in 2009, and I don't think I need to say any more than technology, in part, was responsible for that reductions, those rather dramatic reductions. I mentioned before that I am involved with the Co-Utilization Research Council, and CERC, as we call it, and the Electric Power Research Institute have for more than a decade been developing and updating a coal technology roadmap. The last iteration of that was in August of 2012. We're actually updating it again because things are constantly changing and improving. But I wanted to show you these two charts. Hopefully you can see them. The left-hand chart, first of all, is focused on efficiency and what we can do with technology in the context of efficiency gains. And as Hatada-san and others have intimated or actually said, if you get greater efficiency, you're going to lower the amount of CO2 emissions, maybe 1% efficiency gain, 2 to 2.5% reductions in CO2 emissions. But that left-hand side says that we can move from about the best that we know how to do, 41% efficiency in the U.S., to 48% or more. The right-hand chart, which we also represent as the need for pursuing research and development, to do so, at least in the context of how we think that technology ought to be developed, could result in the prevention or control of conventional emissions of SOx, NOx, particulate matter, so we can clean up emissions to even greater levels than we have today. And those bars represent even greater emission decreases as a consequence of more technology development. Note we also are looking at water. If you were here earlier today, Assistant Secretary or Deputy Assistant Secretary Dr. Friedman had a chart similar to this. His was, I think, more updated. But I want to make one comment about this. We all are very supportive, very hopeful that every one of those projects will be developed and finally built. We all focus on Boundary Dam and Kemper and the Petronova project. A little bit, I think, on the Archer-Daniel Midland project, but there are several other projects up there where, at least in my judgment, it's a challenge. And it's mostly a financial challenge, not necessarily a technology challenge, because those projects are living in a world where the market doesn't yet exist. Those projects are living in a world where there's a lot of cheap natural gas, and there is no driver for, at least again in my judgment, where the technology is going to be able to survive. Now, we talked a lot about the importance of, I think, political and government support. And let me just underscore this by saying that without very significant public support, we're not going to get there. And I'm talking about the support that exists or doesn't exist, unfortunately, within the current administration. And I don't mean, and I do not talk about the really superb efforts that are being done at the Department of Energy, in particular, in an effort to sustain a program and develop a program around advanced coal-based technologies. But let me just walk you through this for a second. The President's request in FY 2015, his current fiscal year, was $302 million. Last year, Congress provided $392 million, and if you just draw a straight line down to the blue line, you can see what the administration requested then. So in terms of trying to increase, augment the amount of funding for technology, research and development, I'm not talking about demonstrations, research and development, It's really been the Congress. I'm not saying that the administration hasn't been helpful, but I'm saying it's the Congress that has moved the money up to a level where at least Kirk believes we need to be in order to achieve the kind of goals that I had in that frame back a ways that you probably couldn't see. Well, for those of you who follow this kind of wonky stuff, earlier this week, you probably know that the House and the Senate agreed upon the Omnibus bill, omnibus, continuing resolution, whatnot, after some amount of acrimony, I might point out. But the agreement in the Congress with respect to the president's request in 2015 is around the $400 million mark. Let me conclude by saying that as a organization that is Kirk, we've tried to look at what's required in the technology development world, specifically focused upon coal, in order to ensure that coal has a place in the future as part of one of our important energy options. And what we've looked at is what needs to be done with the existing fleet from an R&D or research development technology perspective. And it's simply stated that is we've got to improve the efficiency of those units. That's going to require some technology. We have to improve the flexibility of those units. We have to improve the reliability of the units when we are asking them now to cycle rather than operate as baseload units. We also believe that we need to put steel in the ground. Again, Bob mentioned an initiative that NIORI and C2E has underway with respect to using the revenue that can be generated from selling CO2, anthropogenic CO2, to enhanced oil recovery. And it is significantly important because it is a revenue stream in the context of technologies that can't make it without additional revenues or sources of revenues because the financial models don't work. And then thirdly, we are very supportive of technology R&D programs that look not just at trying to improve existing technology, low-cost electricity coming from that, but also transformational technologies, that is, new power cycles and new ways to use coal cleanly and cost-effectively. A part of our discussion is that technology not only addresses future environmental concerns, just as it has successfully done for decades in the past, but also, more importantly, technology, in our view, is a means to low-cost electricity, improving people's lives, and making possible modernization through electro technologies. That's the 1.3 billion people in the world who have inadequate supplies of electricity or no electricity at all, and is the promise that as a modern society we have to make available to everyone, at least to the extent we can. Let me finally say that with respect to this, if we call it a three-part technology program, Senator Heidi Heitkamp, a Democrat from North Dakota, in March of this year has actually introduced legislation with a number of our colleagues that includes that three-part program and other elements of coal and technology that she has come up with respect to her own analysis of this. And I believe her intention is to introduce that legislation again in the new Congress. That's certainly our hope and expectation. I thank you for your attention. Again, I apologize for the small fonts, and the only thing I can tell you right now is I only had 19 slides, not 50. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. Wow, so we have a lot of information, data, and ideas that we can discuss. But while you think about coming up with great questions to pose to the panel, I do have at least one or two questions that I'd like to start with. Well, I guess it's the CCS is certainly not just for coal. So it could be used for natural gas as well. Are there sort of between sort of some of the public and private sector stakeholders, is there sort of a common understanding that the CCS could be is something viable for even for the natural gas industry, or is there sort of a concerted effort to support measures, whether it's the increased budget for R&D, but is there a lot of discussions between coal folks and then natural gas folks on the viability of CCS?
Well, I mean, you have a little bit of a greater dilemma of the distribution because there's 1,700, I think, natural gas plants in the United States even today, and so they're distributed more widespread. But I think the general feeling is later in the century they're going to have to capture some of that carbon as well, and perhaps use it as a product or have more localized injection. But I think there's also a sense that if you can solve the problem for the high volume and with some of the impurities that you have in the coal gases that you're trying to extract the carbon out of, that whatever approach is taken there will be adaptable to a natural gas situation. But there will be a distribution set of issues, later in the century in terms of how to deal with the carbon once you capture it. But the technology advancements that are happening and will continue to happen, as Ben pointed out, should be adaptable. Also to other industrial processes, they're not power generators that are also generating carbon. I think you had some ethanol plant data up there as well.
I just underscore that by saying, and Bob made the point exactly, that it's sources of CO2. It's not just coal, it's certainly not just natural gas, it's steel plants, it's ethanol plants, it's cement plants.
The other question I have, at least one of the several other questions, is that I guess, this earlier today, I mean, I guess we did spend quite a bit of time on countries that do have economic profiles and also probably natural resource endowment profiles where the CCS with the EOR is not really an option. And since this isn't a panel that will look at, talk about the economic competitiveness aspect of coal, but I sort of wanted to get, your sort of thoughts on what are some of the lessons that our experiences with CCS, I mean, how do we sort of make our experiences and experiments going forward relevant to some of these countries that do not have EOR? I mean, certainly, by building more, we can start driving down the cost and then really make the pie, the CCS, technology or actually the equipment pie bigger, and then that to become a lot more just commercially viable industry or sector per se. But other than that, what are some of the ways that you think that we should be thinking about?
I think it's important to point out, and I'm not an expert here, but those in our organization who are, emphasize that storing CO2 can be done. We know how to do it. So let's start there. The real issue is solving, and some states are trying to address this, is in fact, what are the liability issues surrounding large volumes of compressed CO2 for a very long period of time? Who's responsible for that? And how do you work through those kinds of really important issues? We have an issue with respect to at least some in the EOR community have an issue with how EPA has determined to classify wells as Class 2 or Class 6 wells. I'm certainly no expert in that area. I'm just mimicking what I hear, but that seems to be a difficulty as well. So I think the important thing, Jane, is that on the one hand, from the technology perspective, we can inject CO2, and we have great confidence that we can keep it there for very long periods of time. It's these other issues which are equally as important that have to be dealt with. And they have to be dealt with early on, particularly not just in the U.S., but in other places in the world where we're trying to do this. Vattenfall, for those of you who are familiar, is a very good example of assuming that it'll be okay to inject CO2, and it didn't quite work out that way.
We talked about the cost reduction for CCS through the path of, coming from the higher volume of experience. I mean, doing more will lower the cost. But this is one way to go down the cost. But there's another way, that not only accumulating more experience, but the other way is to be successful with new technologies with CCS that will significantly lower the cost for CCS. But this will take time. Okay? But this will take time. But we are also working on new technologies that will make CCS possible with the significantly lower cost. The cost, when you talk about not the initial investment, but about the running cost basis. If you speak on a running cost basis, the reason that CCS is so costly is because you need energy to do CCS. So we are trying to come up with ways to realize carbon capture with using significantly less amount of energy. That's what we're working on. And that will make CCS more viable for other countries.
Yes, Bob?
So just to help folks who are not aficionados of the underground injection and control program,
Including mine.
that Ben mentioned, Class 2 and Class 6. Class 2 is for enhanced oil recovery, and it has a number of requirements for monitoring the process and everything else. But obviously, you're sticking the carbon into a existing reservoir of hydrocarbons. Class 6 it was created in the last 5 years as a class of underground injection and control to protect groundwater for purely carbon capture and storage. And I think the two provisions in there, Ben, that cause people the most agita are the monitoring and reporting requirements. Is it really down there? Is it staying down there? And the second one is the financial assurance component, which is undefined and subjected to permitting, nuances or arbitrary thinking, or whatever you want to call it, and until we understand better about what all the broader liabilities are, it was not resolved in this rulemaking. So there's this like open-ended question in almost every permit. What is the financial assurance I need to provide here? And I think I think EPA knows that has to be fixed. Mm-hmm. And the question, and there's a whole group of people that have been working on it, and hopefully we'll continue to have a dialogue on that. And then the last thing I'll mention, EOR is a good transition, and it's geographically limited, as Hiro pointed out. But there has to either be, or both, a price on carbon, as they say, so that you can actually make money by putting it into the ground and sequestering it. Or alternately, we learn how to use that carbon for other kinds of industrial processes that then doesn't allow it to get back up in the atmosphere, but it gets put into something we make and it permanently sequestered that way. I think all those things are going to happen, but they're not there right now.
Not yet, no, I guess. Just quickly, sort of building up on Hiro's last comment, that it does take energy to I guess, run CCS. Is that how you can agree? I just, it's not I find it fascinating how the, I guess, full CO2 capture at CCS actually does reduce efficiency and requires more coal burning, right? I mean, that's just, something that I was going through one of the IEA reports on coal, and I just, thought it was kind of fascinating. And so to some extent, I think they're both the relative, these things tend to be relative, but relative advantages and disadvantages